In 2001, Elvis Stanosic made history as the first Australian to compete in the UFC, giving rise to generations of aspiring Aussie fighters. Since that time, athletes from the land down under have risen to the very top of the organization, with waves of young contenders, record-breaking events, and revered champions in Robert Whittaker and pound-for-pound king Alexander Volkanovski. We caught up with some of these Aussie warriors to discuss the immense impact of Australians competing in the UFC. This is On Point.
Oh, well, a good day to you from Australia. The UFC returning to the land down under.
The impact Australian fighters have had on the UFC is pretty significant.
They say it's the fastest growing sport in Australia. You definitely see that. 10 years ago to now, it just evolved so much, it's getting huge.
With the growth of the UFC and mixed martial arts, it was only natural for Australia to follow and to start producing some of the highest caliber of athletes the world has ever seen.
We've always had really exciting fighters and fighters that just go to war.
Whoa!
Oh, he rocked him.
I don't know what it is, but we just love a good scrap.
Absolute warrior.
The Aussies love this type of stuff, right? They love the combat sports. They love contact.
Fighting is in our nature, it's something that runs deep in our blood, and I think that's why we're so drawn to it.
The Australian MMA scene has just been skyrocketing, and we all get along. We're all on the same team and we all back each other. When one of us wins, we all win.
The crowd on their feet.
I've been watching for a long time, so I remember Elvis Stanosic.
The king of rock and rumble, Elvis Stanosic. Oh, trouble here. There's the tap. There's the tap. It's over.
Anthony Peros.
Anthony Peros is a real pioneer of martial arts in Australia. That's under the chin.
Oh,
there's the tapping hand. He puts it to work.
All those guys, Colin Oak.
Aussie. Kyle Noak. He got him.
The first Australian MMA fighter in the UFC that I remember was George Sotiropoulos.
George was so important because he was the first guy in those lighter weight divisions that showed us kids who were here training at the time that we could get to the top of the division.
He's going for an arm. Make sure the dent doesn't turn.
It's
Nice. Beautiful. George Sotiropoulos.
These pioneers, they paved the way for my generation and even the generation up from me.
They opened the doors and let through the flood.
We'll see you next in UFC Australia, maybe, huh?
Thank you. Aussie.
The first event in Australia was UFC 110.
From beautiful Australia, the MMA leader has touched down in this great nation.
The UFC coming and showing that they could run such a professional show in Sydney opened the public's eye to the fact that this is a sport, not some backyard thing.
And that's why we kept getting good events.
We're in Melbourne, Australia. We welcome you to Adelaide, live inside the RAC Arena here in Perth, Western Australia.
It showed the love and passion for it, that us as a nation could fill out a whole stadium.
UFC 193, that made waves in the sport.
Record-setting attendance inside the Etihad Stadium.
It was a huge moment for all of us.
Fighting out of Australia, Ben 10 wins. Rich Walsh is all over him. He's hurt. Rich Walsh, dominant. What a finish for Daniel Kelly. Kyle Noak, he defeats Peter Sabata. Completely dominant for Matthews.
Mark Hunt and Bigfoot, that fight was unreal.
Oh, he tagged him. Trying to finish it. Hit us all over. Mark Hunt by knockout.
And then there was Holly Holm versus Ronda Rousey.
Here we go.
I remember watching Holly land that head kick.
Holly looking to finish. Out.
The whole stadium erupted.
Holly Holm shocks the world in front of a record-setting crowd.
Australian events are different because of the crowd, the atmosphere. We've got a different kind of culture over here. It's always fun, put it that way.
The Australian fans are lunatics.
You go to other cities and they're not there till like the main cards. Australians are there from the very first fight. When it is an Australian event, they get behind their own like no other.
You can hear the crowd during the fights, they're just electric.
There is an energy that they put out that you cannot describe. It's an honour to fight in front of Aussie fans as an Australian.
Sydney West, stand the up, brah. Come on.
In 2012, the Tough Smashers come out. What it done for Australia MMA was it definitely put it on a rapid incline then.
I just remember seeing Whittaker as a young guy coming through, and he obviously did so well in that.
He just went out there and just smashed everybody.
Yeah, stop!
The impact of that show was huge because once I got into the UFC, I'd like to think that I had a bit of a hand in promoting the sport quite thoroughly in Australia.
A lot of promise for this kid. We may have a contender here, Robert Whittaker.
When he started beating those top 10 guys, yeah, it was pretty obvious that he was going to be champion.
Robert Whittaker with a head kick! Whittaker has knocked out Derek Brunson in the first round!
Rob's fights against Yol, obviously, crazy.
A closely contested championship fight. Oh, big elbows! Australia has a UFC champion. His name is Robert Whittaker.
To have an Australian fighter get the world title, it's so big. For me, it definitely gave me even more hope than I already had. It wasn't too long after that before I was able to do it.
Alexander Volkanovski trying to win a UFC title tonight. No!
Now we have Volk, the current champion, the featherweight division.
The way Volk represents Australian MMA is just incredible. And he goes out there and performs.
Oh my goodness. Oh!
Every time he fights, I turn into a fan.
Still the best featherweight in the world.
He paved the way. Not only can you become a champion, but you can become the very best in the sport and dominate.
And still!
It's crazy to think that we have the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world in Australia.
Surely this is the golden era of Aussie MMA. I think it's only going to get better.
And I feel like this is the wave that takes over the whole sport.
The guys like me and Jimmy and all that are coming through, we're standing on the shoulders of giants, of people who have come before us and kind of laid the path. Now we can really try and emulate that example that they've set.
It's an honour and it's a responsibility to represent Australia. It's such a great country with great people, and to wear that flag is a pretty special feeling.
We've shown you, we've got champions, we've got contenders, and it's just going to keep going.
Great to be down under. Love this country.